Hello and welcome to our webinar today on passwords for businesses. So often passwords are overlooked, as often we think our teams know the risks and how passwords should be used, created and shared. But as we have often, a lot of people have learned that that's not always the case. So in this webinar, you'll learn how people should be using passwords and login methods to minimize the risks. And these risks are not just external, they're also internal risks. So first of all, let's have a look at how many weird and wonderful ways that your team might be using to remember passwords and possibly share passwords. So there's loads of different things, and these are some of the popular methods that actually we've seen firsthand. So they might use passwords, the same passwords on multiple platforms. So this is obviously really, really bad, because if that platform gets hacked, they will go after the data, they'll find the email address and the passwords that are synced together, and they'll then try that same concoction on multiple platforms. And especially with AI, they can try it in many weird and wonderful ways. They can add a 1 on the end, an exclamation mark, anything like that. Other things, storing passwords on their mobile. So this is either in notes, or maybe that they're actually storing them as a contact. We've even seen that people have stored contacts within their mobile. So, for example, they'll save it under NatWest Bank and then write their password in it. So, again, other things, easy to guess passwords, their kids' names, their pets' names. Stickers on monitors. This is really bad for internal risks, obviously, because what we want to try and do is have an audit trail of everything that your teams are doing. So if they're all using each other's passwords and things, there's no audit trail. We've seen one of the absolute worst is password spreadsheets, and these are saved often on people's desktops or in a shared folder. This is absolutely terrible from a cybersecurity, because it's a single point of failure. If I was to hack into your computer, I'd find a password spreadsheet and then I can go for it. Also, with hackers, the first thing that they will look for and they'll search for is anything named password. So, and that's the name of a file or folder, or within that file and folder. So other things, passwords on sticky notes. And of course, one that we always like is writing your passwords on the underside of your keyboard. So yeah, there's just a few different ways. So we know the world is not all sunshine and rainbows. There are external and internal risks. So what are the risks? So, for example, if you've got an Amazon password that's shared between other people, how do you keep it updated? This is often one that we see, and people ask the question of, well, you know, we want to update the Amazon password. Then someone goes in their phone and cannot receive a PIN code for their multi-factor authentication. So hopefully most of you will have multi-factor authentication, which means you will use your email address and a password, and then it pings your mobile and says, give us the code. Often that, if someone forgets their phone, or maybe you're sharing a password, what happens? Also, share app, Microsoft Teams. These are all things that aren't necessarily encrypted, so you can be sharing your other things. It's if you use your passwordless login and the employee leaves. So passwordless logins, Microsoft is really keen on this, and they're pushing a lot of their accounts and security towards it. Effectively, you won't have a password, because you'll be using more of the multi-factor side of things. So whether it's an authenticator that's on the phone, or whether it's, again, a PIN number that you put in separately. So if the employee leaves, often your password will be connected to their mobile phone. So then if they leave, you then can't log into your platform. And this is a really big thing for passwords, is that you need to try and make sure that it's your password, yours in terms of the companies, not the individuals. Because if the individual owns and controls it, that means that if they were to leave, you know, or maybe, you know, any other reason, they would be in control of it. So you as the company would lose that control. And that's really what we want to try and avoid. That's one of the biggest things. The other thing is that they might use a password keeper, but what if it's their personal password keeper? Often we see that people will use their, let's say, Google personal Gmail account with a password keeper, and then they'll be logging in with their business accounts. So then there's a real mishmash of, is it a business account that should be owned and controlled by the business? But then if it's in their personal password keeper, it's actually in control by them rather than the business. That's when you can then choose things like using Microsoft Edge with your Microsoft business account, because then you're creating more of a password keeper under the business rather than personal. But that's still not necessarily going to fix all the issues. So what are we trying to avoid? Passwords is often an area that people overlook when considering cybersecurity as a whole. Often you think, oh, well, I'm looking after the machine and I've got maybe an antivirus and spam filters and things like that. And often you just assume that people know what a good password policy is and that they should be using long passwords with different characters and letters and things, but that's not always the case. So you need to understand what's the worst thing that can happen so that we can then really look at trying to avoid it. So it's not just about losing your password. You could lose your business, and it has happened, and it does happen on a daily basis. So there's lots of different impacts that it can have. Short-term impacts can just be basic things like your team member can't work because they can't log in, or they're logging out of platforms that could stop different software from syncing. So for example, if you've got an accountancy program and you've got a marketing program, you might have them connected together. Well, if you then change a password, it could then break that sync, and you might not necessarily know that that sync's broken until later on. So it could go past, weeks or months. It can then cause bigger issues to your business. Obviously, the obvious short-term impact is a cyber attack, or downtime, or losing data. But then it can get more serious. Then we look at mid-term impacts, which is things like issues with your team. Team members put down a lot of the reason why they might leave a job is because of lack of morale and they don't feel trusted. And straight away with passwords, it can cause real friction if they were to be hacked or lose any of their passwords. The other midterm is losing data. But the worst long term is reputational damage. So for example, you'll lose a client because you've been hacked, or you lose some of their data, or maybe your operational systems don't work properly, so you're then late on deliveries, for example. You can have insurance issues. So often with insurance companies, people will take out cyber insurance, but then if you were to try and make a claim and you can't prove that you've got good password policies and procedures in place, they won't pay out. So it's almost not worth having insurance. You need to be really careful. And then the final really long-term issue can be audit and non-compliance fines. It's one of the biggest things that a lot of auditors will look into, because with passwords and data breaches, it's all about how do you overcome it, but what did you put in place to mitigate the risk of getting a password breach or a cyber attack? And this is the big thing with, when people are asking, or auditors are asking the questions, you need to show that you were doing the right thing. And that often can really come on the wrong side of the auditor's trail, as it were. So the big question, how should businesses be using passwords? Now, there's two sides to it. One is about having a clean password policy, so understanding, what passwords should and shouldn't be. And then the second thing is, how can you then put that throughout the business with making it really, really easy? So if we look at what passwords should be, so first of all, they should always be unique per system. Never repeat a password ever. Alluded to earlier that, say, for example, you have a password on Amazon, for argument's sake, and Amazon gets hacked. You then see in the news that Amazon was hacked, X amount of data breaches happened. So what that means is that they probably were hacked, and your email address with that password is then effectively taken and then sold on the dark web. So what will then happen is that a hacker generally, you know, some kind of bot or whatever, especially with AI, will basically take all of that data and then they will try and use that login on thousands of other platforms. So for an example, you might have a login to, let's say, Sainsbury's. So if you're using the same email and password that you do for Amazon and in Sainsbury's, they'll try and brute force into Sainsbury's to log in. And of course, if it's the same, then they will get through. You need to, the second element is avoiding a single point of failure. So this is things like spreadsheets. Never have lots of passwords in one place. You really shouldn't be recording passwords unless it's in an encrypted environment, because if you've got a spreadsheet and you get hacked, that's it. There's multiple places. They'll just be able to log straight in. And remember, it's not a person that's logging in. It's a computer program that will log in and straight away change your password. So they'll effectively disable and lock you out of it. So you need to really make sure that you don't have multiple passwords in one place. The next is if someone was to lose their phone. So if you do have your individual employees logging in with their own password, and then the multi-factor authenticator is then pinging their personal mobile or their business mobile, but their phone gets stolen, this is when it can really cause issues, because your phone, if it's stolen, first of all, there might be passwords saved on it, so we definitely don't want that. But secondly, if the person then tries to log in, it will ping their phone, they can then get in. So you need to be really, really careful about how and when it's actually sending those secondary PIN codes to whose phone it is. The next thing is just having basic things like making sure that computers log off after, let's say, 5 minutes of someone not using them, or they automatically log the person out when they're not using certain programs. So again, the top level setup things that you can do within your business devices, just to make sure that people aren't, if their device is stolen, or even if they just leave the device on and go and grab a cup of coffee, someone isn't then able to access the device. You just need to be really careful with that, especially if you're in an industry where a lot of the data is private and confidential. You need to be really close, because again, that's when also you can then move into breaches in GDPR and another legal side of things. But we don't want to get into that because we're talking about passwords today. So next thing is you've got to make sure that passwords are strong. Strong being uppercase and numbers and special characters. So you can do this on the other side, which is if, for example, you've got a Microsoft login for someone, you can go into the admin side of your Microsoft account and state this is, I want a strong password policy, and then it will enforce that. But often a lot of these programs, you might not have access to that. Let's say, for example, people are using like ChatGPT or Canva or one of these programs. Often individuals will set up their own account. So it's then, how do you make sure that they are using a strong password? So it can be really difficult for that. The next is MFA, so multi-factor authentication. Now, ultimately, there's using an authentication app. We would generally recommend the Microsoft one if you're a Microsoft house. So if you're mainly using Microsoft 365 and you've got a proper business account set up, then you can also then have the Microsoft Authenticator, because it means that if you were to lock someone out, you can then lock out that person as well from the Authenticator app. Obviously, then there's other things like biometrics, so whether it's face or fingerprints, and there's PIN numbers. But it's all about having that that second layer of security. I don't want to be able to grab your password and be able to log straight in. You need to be able to put in a username and a password and then have that second factor. Obviously, most banks and things like that already have that in place, but it's just making sure that all the platforms that your users are using always have that bit switched on. And then the final thing is, when we're talking about how it should be done, is that you need to have clear access policies in place. So clear meaning who needs access to what and why and for how long. So an example could be you're going to have different layers of people within your business. Well, any accountancy program, you should state, actually, we only want owners, director level, and then the accounts person to have access to that. Or you may say, well, we need our salesperson to have access so that they can look at invoices. Great, but make sure that you've got strong password policy and different security for those types of people. So it's just really making sure that you've got and thought about who do you want access to, why, and for how long. And then the next stage is you've got to then make sure that you, whether it's just a calendar note for every 3 or 6 months in the diary, but you regularly audit these and you delete the old accounts. So for example, when staff leave or they no longer need to use the software, you've got to be really, really careful on that. So how can this all be achieved? The ultimate way is for a password manager. By using a password manager that the company controls and owns, not the employee, the password manager can then change everything. You as the business owner or the administrator of the technology for the business means that you're in control, not the employee. And that's the biggest thing that we would say is you've got to shift it away from the individual to the company. But you make it so that they're able to generate, store and share all the passwords, but it's at the company's discretion, not the employees. And this is the big thing. So first of all, what we really need to do is look at the company and what the biggest issue is. And that is that you hope everyone understands the passwords and the risks. But what if they don't? What if you have a new employee start and they forget to read that page in the induction manual? What if you've got a member of your team that's been around for far too long, but they're like one of the furniture and they just don't understand the risks associated with passwords? So you need to be able to build a really strong password behavior throughout the organization and ensure that everyone adheres to that. And this is where having a password manager is simple. One login to the password manager, the password manager then makes sure that you've got the standards in place that you want, that it gives the access to the people that you want. An example would be individual password or a shared password, and then you can choose who. But the way they work is it makes it actually easier for the employee because it will always suggest a really strong password. So the employee doesn't even need to think about what password to create. It will always store them securely and fully encrypted. It simplifies the access because when you go to log into something, you'll click on your email address or whatever is the username, and it will automatically put the password in the password box. So the employee doesn't even need to know what the password is because they've logged into the password manager. The password manager does everything else. This also does spread across to their mobile phone. So if you, for example, give someone access to one of your business software platforms, whether they're on their mobile or whether they're on their computer or their Mac, they'll be able to log in to anything because the password manager is what holds everything. So they could lose a device, it doesn't matter. They can just get a new device, log into the password manager, and then be able to log into all the different platforms. It will also support passwordless login, which is coming. Soon whether we say soon, but at some point we probably won't have passwords. And this is going to be really, really bad for you if you're allowing your team members to use their personal mobile phones, because all the control will be throughout that mobile phone, whereas you don't want that. You need the password manager in the middle that will give the control and the access. So that then, as I say, if the worst happens, which is whether one of your employees gets run over by a bus and they can't access their phone, or whether their phone gets stolen, or it's a disgruntled member of the team, you as the company hold all the keys and you can just in one switch kill access to everything. So obviously the accounts will still be live at the other end, but if you're using the multi-factor authenticator within the password manager, they won't be able to log in. Because we get asked a lot, well, if the password manager creates the password, can the employee write it down? Well, the answer is yes. But what they can't then do is go to the second stage, which is then when the password manager gives them the PIN number to enter, they won't have access to that. So it does block their access. But sharing done right and securely is what you really want. So an example would be, let's say I've got, let's say Amazon again. I'm using Amazon and I've got 5 members of my team that use the same Amazon account because we only want to pay for Prime once, as opposed to all 5. So if for me to, I might think, oh, actually, I'm going to update my Amazon password because that's it's good to do that every sort of 3 months, ideally. So I then update the password and someone else tries to log in and they can't. So I then message them the new password. Well, that's obviously, that's not very good. Or I might write it down on a sticky note and then that person then sticks that to their monitor. Or if you've got 5 people accessing it, who gets the code? Which person's phone does that do? What if the person's phone, they're then on holiday? So there's lots of different reasons why sharing a password manually, one, it's not good from a security perspective, but 2, it's an absolute pain for the employees to try and work out and to log in. And it's all wasted time. Whereas if you've got a shared password, the password manager knows who to share it with. And then when they create the PIN, it can create the PIN for that person. So it just makes it a lot easier for the employee, but safer for the company. And that's why it definitely is a win-win. It also creates a full audit trail so that you can see what passwords have been used when. You can check logins, you can do resets, anything at all. It's fully scalable. So as your team grows, you're just naturally, as on day 1 of their induction, you would spin them up as a new user. And then you've got great password policies. You've got the multi-factor authentication set up from them on day 1. So it's super slick, really easy. You don't even need to train them on, good password policies because it's already enforced within the password manager. But then I'd just say that the best thing really is the fact of you can kill the access instantly. And that's the big thing. It allows you to sleep really well at night. It just makes it easy for staff and secure for the business. So it really is just so easy. So as I say, so we've gone through, what should you do with passwords? What are the worst things that people do with passwords? And then ultimately, you've got some tips and tricks on password cleanliness, but we would overall recommend using a decent password manager is the thing that is controlled and owned by the business. So we do have an offer we do have a Q&A session. I've seen some questions that have actually been coming in, but before we go to the Q&A, we'll just say that if you are interested in talking about a password manager, we've got a deal on for you as you've attended this webinar. Our offer is that we would offer completely free setup and training for you, and that's normally charged at £150. So if you are interested, please do reach out afterwards. We can obviously sort out a demo and ask any one-on-one questions, but as I say, we do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll get to them in a sec. Just before, if any of you didn't want to go on the Q&A session, these are my details, and also they're Syn-Star's details. So pick your favorite social media, or as I say, I can be found on LinkedIn just as Giles Cleverly. So please do find me on LinkedIn. It'd be great to connect with you on there, or you can follow me. So yeah, let's dive into the questions and answers section. So first question. So does everyone have to use it? Yes, really is the best thing. I mean, the answer is no, but you're better off to just enforce it for everyone, to just say, look, everyone uses the password manager, do the migration into it, and just get everyone using it. But it is one of those things that once people start using it, they'll find it so much easier. Imagine never having to type a password again, accidentally typing, clicking the wrong key, and then you have to click delete, 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 and then type in the password again. All of that aggro is gone. It's just so much easier to use a password manager. So but yeah, effectively, security is only as good as its weakest link. If you've got someone that's not going to be using it, then that's a weak link. So we would generally say yes, ideally everyone within the business uses a password keeper. And even if you've got contractors, part-time people, you can kind of set it up for everyone. Next question. Does it take long to set up? So it can be really, really easy. There's a couple of ways that we can do it. We can either just get a list of your employees, again, list of their email addresses, set it up, and it fires it out to all of them. They can then set it up and install it. It's really, really quick and easy. But also we can connect it directly to your Microsoft 365 tenant. So that means that as you add a new tenant and a new email address, it can add it that way as well. But it is relatively simple to set up, whereas the training and things we can help you with. But once people log in and use it for one website, it's kind of easy. And then when you try and do a password for the next website, it will come up, suggest strong password, click that, and away you go. So once you use it a couple of times, it is really, really simple. Right. Where is the best place to store passwords? Well, it is a password manager, but essentially it's in an encrypted vault is what you really need. So that what you need is that thing of, if someone was to hack your device, would they then just be able to have a sniff around, find a load of passwords, or go into your contacts or anything? Whereas if there's that extra element of encryption, they still wouldn't be able to access that. So yeah, really, but a password manager is the key one. And especially if you do anything like Cyber Essentials, if you've got ISO 27000, which is your cyber security, and also there's a newer AI one now, that's very much going to be, there are multiple questions around passwords. If you're using a password manager, it's a tick in each box straight away. So and there's no ambiguity then. Everyone should be using a password manager within your business, so that you know that they're using correct passwords, and also the multi-factor side. Who holds the admin credentials? Right, who holds the admin credentials? So you can choose, basically. Again, you can choose whether the users have access to shared passwords, private passwords. You can set it up however you want, but generally people will normally have their own private passwords. So that user is the only one that can see the password. Not even the administrator can see the user's passwords, because it's for the user to use, unless the company says, actually, no, I want to kill their access. And that's the big key. Killing their access is, oh my God, they've had their laptop stolen, or they've just walked out the door in a big huff and and left the business. I just want to make sure that we've killed access to everything. And as I say, with a password manager, it doesn't matter if they've written down the passwords, because it's that multi-factor, the PIN number part, that will also be behind the iron wall, as it were, which is the password manager. So yeah, it's very much you would have admin credentials so that you can set up new users, but in terms of what the user has stored on there as private, it's private. Whereas obviously a shared password, you can select who you want to access that password. So, and then they can have access to it. Is this okay for Cyber Essentials? Oh, I think this question might have been written before. So yeah, Cyber Essentials, it's absolutely spot on for. Again, within Cyber Essentials, there's multiple questions around passwords. So you don't strictly need a password manager to pass Cyber Essentials. Albeit what we would say is that Cyber Essentials, so we saw a massive change in Cyber Essentials around April time this year. And it's a lot more around auditing and reporting on cyber hacks. So when you've got a password manager, it just means you've got that extra bit of information so that you can also share the audit of your passwords as well. Whereas most companies, if they don't have a password manager, they would struggle with that, or you'd have to manually to each software and manually try and get the information. So definitely from an auditing perspective, and as I said, in April there was a big huge update with Cyber Essentials. I would imagine within the next year or two, when the next big update comes, it will be more around auditing and reporting, because that really is the big thing. So it will definitely help with that. Let's just does the solution integrate with other services, apps, systems and solutions? Can you name some and give a brief description how such integration works? It doesn't as such integrate. So the way that it would work is when you log in, when you turn your machine on in the morning, you would log into your password manager. So then once you're then logged in, when you then click on, I don't know, let's say HubSpot, if you use that for marketing, the user straight away will be able to click for their email address. And then when they click on the password box, it will actually push it will dump the password into there. Then when they click login, it will then ask for the PIN code, in which case they would get that PIN code from the software. But it does kind of stay standalone. But where it would sync is, for example, if you've got, as I said, Microsoft 365, it can sync with the tenant for that. And also for things like auditing and reporting, you could use a connector, so something like Zapier, which would allow you to connect certain things. But generally, as it is, it's sort of own encrypted vault for its own passwords. But again, you would set it up once and away it goes, and it's so easy and scalable. So in an encrypted vault, but doesn't the solution does that by default? I'm not quite sure what that question means. So in an encrypted vault, but doesn't the solution do that? Yeah, I mean by default, the password manager is fully encrypted, whereas your machine within itself isn't fully encrypted. So it means that someone could hack into your machine if it's not encrypted and get all of the data that's there. Whereas if they were to hack into your machine and try and look within the password manager, because it's encrypted, it would be gobbledygook. It wouldn't work. So in its raw state. So I think that answers the question. I'm not 100% sure if that has answered it, but I think it has. So hopefully. What apps are exceptions? For example, email, MS, Google have their own admin password manager. Yeah, as I say, they do, but the problem is that they're the user's password manager, not the company's password manager. And this is the big thing. So if you've used Google Password Manager, it's a great tool and it's similar to this. But the big difference is that with Google Password Manager, generally it's people that would set it up on their personal. So maybe you as the business owner, it might not make much difference. But for example, if let's say you get a new person that starts within your business and they've been using Google Password Manager already, when they go to create a new password for you in your business, that will then store the password in their personal password manager. And also, you don't know if their password manager, they've got it set to really low security. So it might only need a 3-letter password. But as I say, the big problem is it's then that multi-factor authenticator, whereby it's then going to the person's personal device and you won't have control over it. It's too much of the control is for the individual. And as I say, especially when we move away from passwords in the future, where we go for passwordless logins, then you're definitely going to be stuck because all of the control will be under the individual. So, but yeah, there are other products out there, as I say, like you've said, Google Password Manager, but it's just there for the individual, not for the business. And that's the key, that we really need to, make sure that the business is in control. Is this just an on-prem? No, it's completely cloud-based. So you basically would spin it up and it's completely cloud-based for any user that you want. So it doesn't matter whatever country they're in, and also it will even work offline. Obviously they need an internet connection to get the password manager on their device, but you can use it as an add-on software, and as I say, it will also work on a mobile phone. So it's completely web-based is the platform, so that you as the administrator can log in, create new users, create shared passwords, all of those sorts of things. But yeah, it's completely a web-based solution, so you don't need an on-premise server or anything like that. How long does it take to set up? It's relatively quick. Get us all the information, we can get it set up within a day or two. It generally is really, really quick. And obviously the training side of it, we would normally give you a demo, and but it can be really, really quick. As we've had someone ask about the Google Password Manager, if you've used a password manager in the past, albeit maybe a personal one, then you'll really understand a lot of the functionality. With the product that we do, it's actually it does account docs and things like that as well. So there's a few extra features around it, but we do actually have a link that we can send anyone that is it gives a sort of a breakdown of a couple of the different features that it has got, but it is, from a setup point of view, it's really quick and easy. What's the cost? Good question. Generally, there's around a price point. You're looking at around £4 per user per month is a cost point. Obviously, depending on the number of users, it can be slightly cheaper if you've got a higher number of users. But yeah, let's say, so you're talking £1 a week. So it's really it's a really cost-effective solution. Presume you can have different access levels within the password manager for different members of the team. Yes, you can. So you can have, sorry, the question was, presume you can have different access levels within the password manager for different members of the team. So you kind of can, in terms of, you can create different admin people that can then create different users. But in terms of the password levels, there's only two. One is private. So literally, if you select a private password, you're the only one that can see it and use it. And that's on purpose, because you don't want an admin person being able to see anyone's password, because then it can cause issues with confidentiality and audits and things like that. But then you can also then create a password that's a shared password, as I alluded to Amazon, for example. And then you would then say update the password. It updates it within Password Manager. So as I say, when you go to log into Amazon, you'd select the password box and it puts the password in. You as the user wouldn't know it's been updated, but you'd only know it was updated if you were the one that updated it within Amazon. But as soon as you update a password, you just click a button to say yes, update. So it's really, really simple. But from an admin perspective, there are just literally a couple of layers. So but yeah, we can definitely have it so that there's different admin people on there. Right, I know we've got, so that's in the Q&A. Have a look. Any other questions? Right, no, I think that's all. Have we got any other questions for the Q&A? No, I think that's everything. So, okay, well, thank you very much for your time. As I say, there's my contact details. Do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, but also if you've got any questions at all, you can either find me. My email address is just giles@syn-star.co.uk, or you can visit Syn-Star. Our website is syn-star.co.uk. You can go on there. You can do a chat. You can ask for a quote. And yeah, it would be great to discuss more about passwords and any type of cyber security. So thank you very much for your time.